Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Jersey Blitz, NJ.com's high school football podcast. I'm Dan Long, and I'm joined alongside by our six NJ.com football beat writers to talk about everything going on in the Garden State. And on this week's episode, we're breaking down Bergen Bosco, of course, the 80th edition of that epic rivalry. Talk about how Winslow has emerged as the definitive #1 public school in the state. A couple news and notes from around week 4, as well as we listen to all of our writers and their midseason takes. And then, of course, we'll take a look at this week's big games on the horizon, and we'll get it kicked off right away here as I'll bring in Luis Torres and Ryan Patty to talk about that Bergen versus Bosco showdown that happened over the weekend in Soggy, Oradell, New Jersey. And first off, guys, when we're looking at what happened in that game, a top 5 showdown, were you guys more impressed with Bergen Catholic's way of closing out their third straight victory in that series against Bosco? Or are you more impressed with Bosco keeping it close after being blown out the last 2 series and seasons against Bergen Catholic? We'll go with Ryan Patty first to talk about the game, and what did you think from Saturday's game in Oradell?
Yeah, Luis and I talked right after the game ended, and we thought that this game taught us a lot about Don Bosco. And first and foremost, we want to wish Devin Sisler well. He was having a terrific game before he got hurt, and he really only made one mistake before he exited the game. That was the interception. He played a clean game. It was one of the more clean games we've seen from him in person. And I feel like we learned that this Bosco team is really gritty. Bergen hit Quincy Porter for 2 big plays. They had a really good drive after Bosco tied the game at 14, but I thought Bosco's defense played really well and kind of bottled up Bergen's offense for the most part. They didn't get bullied on the ground like I thought there was a chance they could, and they outsnapped Bergen, and they took what Bergen was giving them offensively and a lot of underneath stuff that worked, and they started forcing it in the second half, but they were playing from behind. So the mistakes are fixable. 5 turnovers are a lot, but the 2 fumbles are, execution errors that can be fixed. And the interceptions, like I said, were kind of forced, but you're not going to be in that position every week. And, I thought Bosco definitely held its own.
Louise, same question for you. Were you more impressed by how Bergen Catholic was able to hold on and close it out, or impressed with how Bosco was able to keep it close throughout the whole game?
I agree with Ryan, and it's funny, heading into the year, Don Bosco coach Dan Sabella told me he was confident in kind of his linebacking group and his secondary heading into the year. The biggest question mark that he had was how was the defensive line going to be after the graduation of guys like Lamont Lester and Jordan Thomas who are playing at the next level. And they played really well. And I think one thing that Vito Campanelli kind of mentioned after the game when I was talking to him, Bergen Catholic's head coach, is Bosco really did things differently on Saturday. They kind of went more 3-man fronts, kind of on defensive line. They brought Makai Allen, who's a stud sophomore safety. They kind of played him more as a linebacker. And typically kind of he's more of a strong safety in the box safety, but they basically played him at linebacker. And I think that kind of threw off Bergen Catholic a little bit because Bosco was kind of doing things differently defensively than they had shown the first few games of the year. And Bosco, one thing that Vito also says, like you look at what they've done the first 3 games heading into that game, is they played really, really hard. And you kind of expected that because it's Bergen Bosco and all those guys are going to play really hard. Bosco limited the explosive plays. I think they only allowed 243 yards of total offense, which, we know what Bergen Catholic is capable of with Dom Campanelli, Najee Porter, Dante Kane, Quincy Porter, Brian Porter, etc., all those guys. But for Bosco to kind of limit the big plays and limit the explosive plays, they had a chance there at the end. Looking back, the double pass, I know at the end of the game, Coach Sabella said he wished he had that one back, but they had a shot. I think we were kind of like when it was 24-14, excuse me. We're like, all right, Bergen's kind of in cruise control here. And then Dylan Rona, who played really well, and kind of after Sisler's exited the game, threw a touchdown pass, and then they recovered the onside kick. You're like thinking like, whoa, this game's not over. And then, of course, Naeem Parrish came up with the second interception. But I was really impressed with kind of the way Don Bosco was playing. And just to know on Sisler, Sabella told me on Sunday morning he's doing much better. And I actually reached out to his mom as well. And she said that he slept through the night and is basically back to his old self. So good to hear from kind of that he's doing well again.
That is certainly great to hear. It was a scary moment on the field when Devin Sisler went down, but everybody, no matter who you were cheering for that day, was cheering for number 7 to be good, and hopefully we'll get to see him later on this season. Luis, what does this mean for Bosco going forward? What can they take away from this game? And they don't have a lot of time to lick their wounds. Obviously, after a rivalry game of that note against Bergen Catholic, you're going to get banged up. You're going to have injuries, as we saw with Sisler. But now you have on the horizon the top other two teams in New Jersey. Number 2, DePaul is who they're going to be playing this week, and then St. Joe's, number 3 in the state, the following week. What does this game mean for Bosco that they could take going from their loss to then the next 2 weeks ahead?
Yeah, and we'll definitely touch on the DePaul game here later on in another segment. But I think for Bosco, one of the things that afterwards that the coaching staff was saying is that they said they can compete with any team in the state. And they kind of proved that, especially defense on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, that defense was really, really good, much better than I think everybody kind of anticipated. Like I mentioned, alluded to earlier with the defensive line. I think moving forward, and Ryan kind of touched on that, is they just have to take care of the ball offensively. Dante DeLuca, we saw kind of what he did. He's just a load to bring down. That screen pass that he took, and he broke it felt like he broke 6 or 7 tackles. I think if they can get that running game going, I mean, it was really hard for them to kind of do anything on first down. I mean, Bergen Catholic's defensive line, their front seven is just ridiculous. They're so talented. It's so good. But I think for Bosco moving forward, they know they can lean on that defense because that defense is going to keep them in a lot of games. I think they're going to have to find a way, no matter whoever the quarterback is moving forward, especially if Sisler's going to miss an extended period of time as he kind of recovers, is they're going to have to lean on that running game. We saw a little bit of Rennick Dorless make his debut, kind of catching some balls, but I can imagine they're going to try to get him the ball as much as they can offensively. But I think if you're Don Bosco, you're feeling good. Defensively, you just kind of have to clean things up operationally on offense and on special teams.
And Ryan, despite all of this, at the end of the day, Bergen Catholic emerged with another victory. That's 18 in a row against New Jersey opponents. That's another win, as I mentioned, third straight in this rivalry against their arch rivals in Don Bosco Prep. And in the course of the game, not only, obviously, both teams had to play with the bad weather, and it was bad weather throughout, but Bergen Catholic, 14 penalties, only 2 for Don Bosco. Despite all of that and not having the time possession, BC found a way to win. How do you beat Bergen Catholic this year?
Yeah, I mean, you got to play a clean game, and you don't have to be perfect, but you have to be clean and take care of the ball. And Luis and I highlighted that in our written preview, that winning the turnover battle was what was going to win this game. And Bosco only lost by 4, but Bergen won the turnover battle 5-2. And Bergen did the same thing against St. Joe's last year in the regular season, and they did it against them, against Del Barton, in the state final. And turnovers put you way behind the 8 ball against this team because it's hard to beat them to begin with, even, when they aren't playing their best. And, they had a long touchdown taken away from Anthony Perotti. And like you mentioned, the penalties, and Vito would tell you his team didn't play its best game either. But the bottom line is when you give Bergen opportunities, they're not just going to hand the ball right back to you. They're going to make you pay. And it's about cashing in on your opportunities and not giving them anything extra.
Well, after talking about the number 1 team in the North, maybe we need some time to talk about the number 1 team in the South, and arguably the number 1 public school in New Jersey right now. That's Winslow. And coming in to talk about Winslow and their performance from this past week is Bill Evans. And Bill, I know we had a lot of discussion in previous weeks, and it was a fun banter back and forth with Kevin Minnick and with Joe Zadalis about Toms River North and Millville being the cream of the crop in the public school ranks. But I think Winslow had the equivalent of, here, hold my drink. They wanted to make sure that they knew that they were the top team in New Jersey, and they put on a show against Millville this past week.
Yeah, shocking result. Not necessarily that Winslow won the game, but just how they won it, 35-7, completely dominated all 3 facets of the game. Millville, which had been scoring 40 points a game, scored 1 touchdown, and that was on an 8-yard drive after a fumble return. Their next longest drive got to the Winslow 42, so it was essentially a shutout. I mean, it could have been a lot worse. I mean, it could have been 42-49-0. Jalen Parker threw 4 touchdowns. Cam Miller, Wisconsin commit, he dominated in all 3 phases. He covered Latsier Brooks for the majority of the game. Brooks didn't score for the first time in 14 games. Miller caught 2 big passes, 2 on fourth down, 1 for a touchdown. Had 2 long punt returns. Nakeem Powell, who's not normally a running back, he carried 6 times during the year. They put him in the backfield in the second half, and he carried 21 times and just chewed up a lot of yards. I mean, it was just incredibly impressive. They said in all 3 facets, and Winslow really made a statement.
Bill, what makes them so special this season? Obviously, they had a nice run last year in the postseason. What makes Winslow very special this year, where obviously you had been able to see them leading up to the game, and both you and Kevin were leaning more on the side of Millville in the matchup. But what really made you step back and say, wow, Winslow is the real deal, the way that they, like you said, defensively shut down one of the most explosive offensive teams in the Garden State?
I think that's the thing. I mean, and they've been playing pretty good defense the whole year, as had Millville. So, even though both offenses had been, somewhat explosive during the year, we thought it could be a lower scoring game, and it was, but only on the one side. I mean, I think they're really good on that side of the ball. They have a good young sophomore and also Hurd. They said Miller in the defensive backfield, and just the way they shut teams down, and Jalen Parker's a sophomore quarterback who was really impressive last year. Only got the start part of the season, in part because of injury, but he's been very sharp. And they got a couple transfers in, Marcus Upton being one who made his debut a couple weeks ago and was an immediate impact. So I just think this is a team that's just solid in every phase. And, I think to me, it's that defense that is really impressive. It's going to be tough to put up a couple scores on them, no matter who you are going forward. And, as we talked about, they could see Millville again down the road. And if that's the case, Millville's going to have to turn things around in a lot of different areas and find ways to score against a team that just does not give up yards, let alone points.
Final question, Bill. Do you see a challenge on the horizon in the rest of the regular season for Winslow, or is this a team that is just going to be building up its momentum, like you said, for a potential rematch come postseason time against Millville?
Well, they play Camden this week, and that could be an interesting game. Camden is also very explosive. They got out of the blocks really strong and then had a little bit of a hiccup against Holy Spirit a few weeks ago. So we'll see. I mean, obviously, we're going to favor Winslow in that one. That those are two teams that, that know the coaching staffs know each other well, and, that the kids do as well. That could be a tough physical game. Beyond that, that they do have some of their WJFL American teams down the road, mainland and Cherokee. Again, I would favor them in those games, but they could be challenges. So, and then, once we get down to the playoffs, it'll be them. It looks like it'll be them in Millville again in the state semifinal. So there's a couple games there where, where they'll be tested, but at this point, they've passed in beating Millville and then St. Augustine the week before. Their two toughest tests to this point, and probably won't see anybody as strong as those two teams until potentially meeting Millville again.
Now let's put an official bow on week 4 in New Jersey high school football action, as we'll bring back in Ryan Patty along with Mike Kinney and Joe Zadalis to empty out their notebooks. And Ryan, you were able to see it, a little bit of history that a big losing streak came to an end as Ferris picked up their first win in quite some time.
Yeah, what an incredible win this was for Ferris over Kearney. A touchdown as time expired to snap a 35-game losing streak. It was their first win in over or almost 5 years. Head coach Sean Tyler told me at SFC Media Day in August that Rome wasn't built in a day, and that's the case with Ferris here. And this rebuild's off to a fast start. And he knows Jersey City football. He knows what it takes to win in the city. He graduated from Snyder, and he served as an assistant at Ferris in the past. This was a team that he believed was scrappy coming into the season, and we're starting to see that with games like this. Senior quarterback Isaiah Gonzalez was a starter last year, and he's made strides this year. In the win over Kearney the other day, he had 144 passing yards and 3 touchdowns to go with his 185 rushing yards. And junior Amin Jackson, Coach Deshaun Tyler told me that before the season, he was kind of their do-it-all kid, can do a lot for them offensively, and that's what he did. He had a passing touchdown, a rushing score, and then 2 receiving scores. And this team could very well have more than one win. I mean, they were in it for the full 4 quarters against Mo Beard and Bergen Tech. And, it's still going to take some time for them to consistently win games. But Coach Tyler is starting to put his stamp on the program. And a lot of these games the past 5 years have been non-competitive. And they're in these games. And he's already starting to change the culture at the school.
Congratulations again to Ferris getting back in the winner's circle after 5 seasons. Now we shift gears. Mike Kinney, a couple of big-time performances by players that had 6 touchdowns apiece in the Big Central. Talk about that, first off, with Sayreville and having a big-time performance from their start.
Hey, Sean Jackson, what an unbelievable game for him. He's a kid last year who showed a lot of promise. The only thing for him, the tough thing for him last year was that Zamer Wright was a 3-year starter as a running back. He rushed for almost 4,000 career yards. So Sean got limited carries. Early in the season, it was a little tough for Sayreville to score some points. I think they're a young line, kind of getting things together, not quite in rhythm. But against North Brunswick, this was a surprise because I thought North Brunswick was ready to bounce back. Back and forth game, crazy offensive game, but Sean Jackson was the man. He was the guy. Anytime he got the ball, he was potent. 20 carries, 287 yards, and of course a career high, and we think a school record, 6 touchdowns for him to get them to get Sayreville to 2-3, which right now not too bad considering all the people they lost, including Zamer Wright and some other skilled guys. So Sean Jackson kind of getting the Bombers back in winning form.
Another player that went for 6 touchdowns was a player that I really admired a couple of weeks ago when he was part of our Game of the Week broadcast at Ridge. That was Ryan Turner, Mike, and he went for 6 himself.
Yeah. Okay, like the week before, Aiden Stieglitz rushes for 220 yards, scores 3 touchdowns against Phillipsburg. And of course, I'm thinking, wow, there it is. That's one of the top performances of the year in the Big Central Conference. And certainly for Ridge, wow, that's it. That's, what they're going to talk about at their team dinner. And then a week later, Ryan Turner rushes for 115 yards on only 8 carries, scores 2 touchdowns, and he catches 4 passes for 160 yards from Connor McLachlan and 4 touchdowns. Career high 6 touchdowns, school program record 6 touchdowns. 1 week after, it looked like Aiden Stieglitz had the game of the year for Ridge. So Ridge finding guys every single week to be a star, and who knows who it's going to be next week for them when they play Union.
I'm looking forward to Mike seeing a freshman quarterback as one of our games of the week this week when Cedar Grove will travel to Caldwell. Caldwell being led by a youngin to a victory this past week.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Adam Sepe got his first start the week before against Westwood. Westwood, a very good team, solid team. Caldwell, kind of trying to rebound. They had 3 fantastic seasons in a row. This year, they started at 0-3. Competitive in most of the games, but finding it, a hard time for guys to elevate themselves as team leaders. Well, Adam Sepe did a great job in his first start against Westwood. He was 14 of 19 for 200 yards and a touchdown. Last week, he was incredible. He was 11 of 18 for 243 yards and 3 touchdowns to lead Caldwell to its first win. So he's a guy everybody's looking at now like, wow, where's this freshman coming from? Well, this week they play Cedar Grove. It's a big rivalry game for Caldwell. What a paradox that is, because Cedar Grove's got Stephen Paradiso, who's a 3rd-year starter. Here's a guy passed for 5,000 career yards so far, having a tremendous season. Cedar Grove's 5-0, and so it's going to be quite a test for young Adam Sepe. But nonetheless, in 2 starts, he has shown some magnificent things. Caldwell has a quarterback for the future.
Joe Zadalis, we were witness to a dramatic victory for Central over Southern to take first place in the Class B South. So what do you feel about Central right now at this point of the season?
They were impressive, Dan. I'll tell you, they showed, first of all, resiliency, and then the word I chose to use is courage. They lead 14-0. Then their offense goes to sleep for 23 minutes. They do nothing. Southern pushes back with 3 touchdowns, takes a 21-14 lead with about 6 minutes left in the 4th quarter. Central drives for a touchdown, and their kicker climbs the ball off the left upright. So they're down by 1 with about 2 minutes left. So their defense, which hadn't had a stop since the middle of the 1st quarter, comes out, gets a stop. They get the ball back, start driving down the field. 2 plays before they scored a winning touchdown, their quarterback, Joe Vizosi, who was just brilliant, gets laid out flat. He's out. They have to take him out of play for a game. Out 1 play, comes back in, throws a 20-yard touchdown to C.J. Yates. And I mean, he just dropped this ball in the bucket, up, down, right into the kid's hands. Vizosi hit a career best 320 yards, 4 touchdowns, 3 of them to Yates. Central is gritty. They're somewhat balanced. They like to throw the ball a little bit more than run it, but their big play potential is enormous. Then they have 2 legitimate standout receivers. One, Royalty Riley, is about 6'3", 180 pounds, can go up and get the ball and can fly. And then this kid Yates just chewed Central secondary to shreds. So Central's pretty much in the driver's seat in that division. Like I said, I was impressed. It was a tremendous football game. Clean, well played, in a marvelous mist-filled setting down in Manahawkin.
Last Friday night, Joe, we were down the shore for our broadcast game of Rumson at Middletown South, and the buzz around the facility at halftime was not really about the game that we were all watching, but it was about Toms River North, and hearing that maybe the Mariners were going to get picked off. Is there cause for concern with Toms River North or not really?
I don't think there is, Dan, because I think it's becoming – go back to the beginning of the season, the first couple of weeks when we spoke about Toms River North, I called them different than the last 2 teams. And I think the mistake, and I'm guilty of it as much as anyone else, is that we keep waiting for Toms River North to start driving the ball with the run game, knock people off the ball, knock them backward. And as we're going along, that's apparent they're not going to play that way. They only had 82 yards rushing last week against Point Boro. One of the fastest kids in the state, Mordecai Ford, only had 2 carries. When you would think they'd hand him the ball 10, 15 times a game, sooner or later he's going to break one. But Toms River North did what Toms River North does, and, they threw the ball. TJ Valerio was 19 to 25 for 207 and a couple touchdowns. But this Toms River North team is not physical. They're not that bully kind of team that we saw with Micah Ford and that cast the last 2 seasons. This team is going to be a little more finesse. And listen, Point Pleasant Boro comes out in this flex bone, double wing, triple option. And when you have an option team, the magic number seems to be 14 points. They go up by 14 points, you're in trouble. They go down by 14 points, they're in trouble. So they open up this 14-0 lead on Toms River North early in the game. And the play count, Point Boro, when in the process of going up 14-0, ran 23 plays. Toms River North ran 1. But credit Toms River North for coming back, getting a late touchdown, and then Yanni Papankolis, Mr. Reliable, kicks the field goal, and they win the football game. I do not see Toms River North being challenged the rest of the way. Maybe a little bit by Bergen Catholic in the final game of the year, but I think North has set sail on their way to a division title, Dan.
And Joe, some of the smaller schools in the Shore Conference are going to be taking center stage in a matchup this week that you're going to be liking. It's New Egypt taking on Shore.
Yes, it's a nice story. New Egypt, in its first year in the Shore Conference, came over from the BCSL, and they're doing nice things under Steve Fentz. They play really, really good defense. They've only scored 78 points, but they've only allowed 25. So it's going to kind of be a battle of wills. Shore Regional has a new coach, Donnie Klein, who was at Ocean for 17 years. And, he had this kid named Pickett one year who, lit the Shore Conference up. He runs a pro-style passing attack. They scored 152 points and only given up 7. But the winner of that game will win Class D North. And then next week, Dan, and I'll just change the subject for a moment, we're going to find a little bit more about Red Bank Catholic and Rumson Fairhaven. They're going to play on Thursday night at Count Basie, and I think we'll be able to get a better handle on just how good and how far those 2 teams can go.
And I'm certainly going to be looking forward to that one, as that'll be one of our NJ.com broadcasts and games of the week next week. Now it's time for some midseason takes from each of our NJ.com beat writers, and we'll welcome in for the first time here Kevin Minnick. And Kevin, what are some of your midseason takes so far in this 2024 football campaign?
I'll tell you, Dan, I'm not going to get player specific, but I'm going to get league specific. And the West Jersey Football League started in 2010, so this is its 15th season. The whole purpose of the league was to get teams a full schedule, to get teams an opportunity to play other teams that are equivalent, pretty much equivalent in their size and in their competitiveness. That's clearly been, it comes through so bright and so clear this year with the way things are going in the league. There's teams like Bishop Eustace and Holy Cross Prep and Camden Catholic, Bridgeton, Cherry Hill East. These teams are undefeated, where not that much long ago, and even for Bridgeton last year, these teams hadn't even won a game. They hadn't tasted a victory, but once or twice a season. So I think, this season with the new cycle, the new 2-year cycle kicking in, the divisions being realigned, the American division has always been the toughest division, and it clearly is again this year. But from top to bottom, the West Jersey Football League, I'm 100% convinced, is really doing what it was designed to do.
Staying down in the South, Bill Evans, what are some of your midseason takes from what you've seen so far this year?
Kind of building on what Kevin said. I mean, we talk a lot about the WJFL American, and those are, the 5 best teams or 5 of the best teams in the WJFL. But the WJFL Memorial this year is really interesting. I mean, Bridgeton had 2 straight winless seasons and is now 5-0. Cherry Hill East, which about a half a decade ago had went 5 years and only won 3 games, is also 5-0, and they're on a collision course for the last week of the season to both be undefeated, which is really incredible. ACIT is in that division. They're a first-year program. They've won 2 games. Triton has struggled a bit and has won a couple games. Now, Deptford's out in the last team. They're 0-5, but they've been competitive against some of these other teams. So that division, to me, has been really interesting. I mean, you looked at it at the beginning of the year, and probably, Egg Harbor, I believe, I forgot almost them. They were 1 win last year and now have 3 wins. So I think a lot of those teams, at the beginning of the year, you might have looked at that division and not thought much of it, but a lot of those teams in that division have kind of made a statement, and I'm really interested to see how it plays out the rest of the year.
Mike Kinney, we've reached the midpoint of the season in the Big Central. What has really gotten your attention at this juncture of the year?
Yeah. First and foremost, I know we're all so relieved that Chase Young from St. Thomas Aquinas is doing fine now. He collapsed on the field last week. Joe's of Dallas had a big story about it. We did in NJ.com that night and the day after. He collapsed against Elizabeth, was taken to the hospital, but was cleared. We have no idea whether he'll play again this year, but thankfully he is okay. So that was first and foremost in Big Central news this week. But the thing that has me now, speaking of St. Thomas, they're number 1 in the Big Central. Number 2 is St. Joe's, both having fantastic years, and they play on October 19th. So can't wait. I just hope they keep playing as well as they are now. So that game is the marquee game. I think it will be. But right now in the Big Central, what really has my interest is with Westfield and Phillipsburg, both from last year going down to Group 4, both in North 4. We are clogged with quality Big Central teams in North Group 4. It's really crazy right now how many teams there are. Right, Woodbridge is number 1 in Group 4 rankings. Ridge is number 3. Phillipsburg is number 5. Colonia is number 10, and you also have Westfield, Rahway, Watchung Hills having outstanding years. So, of course, when the season is over and it's time for the playoffs, they won't all be together because 4 will be snaked with North 1 and North 2. But nonetheless, they're going to be together. There's going to be probably some very good matchups in the playoffs, and they're going to be outstanding. Woodbridge and Colonia have already played. Phillipsburg and Ridge have already played. And Westfield and Ridge play in 2 weeks. So we're going to see a lot of action and have seen some action between those schools. But it's just so much fun to see how many really good teams from the conference are sitting in Group 4 right now that has really become a premier section in the state because of the amount of Big Central quality that's in there.
Joe Zadalis, down the shore, everything's all right. What are you seeing that's all right so far here during the midway point of this year?
At the midway point, the team I have my eye on right now is Middletown North. They're off to a 4-0 start, and they haven't been 4-0 since 1983, which I couldn't fathom, until I checked it out. There were years when they won 2 sectional titles and didn't start 4-0. This week, they're at St. John Vianney in a really interesting game. Middletown North's defense, which it's not normally known for, has been lights out, only allowed 21 points. Steve Bush is one of the finest quarterback coaches, offensive minds anywhere. They scored 110 points. And then they have a 5'1", 145-pound tailback who is tough as nails. The other thing, Manalapan is on a roll. They've won 3 in a row. And all of a sudden, they're in the driver's seat in Class B South. And Class B South has been utter mayhem so far. Homedale beat Wall beat Vianney beat Homedale. We've had that little go-round. And that's where we're at in the Shore Conference right now. I think the next 3 weeks are going to be a lot of fun in the Shore Conference.
Luis Torres, it's your time to talk about what are some of your midseason takes from the Super Football Conference.
Yeah, I think when I started on the beat 2 years ago now, this is my 3rd year, I quickly found out that Morris County football is pretty good. I mean, you had West Morris 2 years ago, West Morris again last year, winning another sectional title along with Mount Olive and Del Barn, of course, making a state final. Morris County, again, is kind of deep and loaded with plenty of sectional championship contenders. I mean, West Morris is on the horizon again. Del Barn's 4-1. They're playing really well. And you have Mount Olive, even though they lost, we touched on it last week when they lost to Chatham. But that means Chatham is also a contender. They're 3-1. Yeah, Montville is still undefeated, is 5-0. Hanover Park, Pequannock, big game this week. They're both undefeated. They're gonna be playing for the division title on Saturday. Both those teams look like they're also sectional championship contenders when their section in Group 2. I think that's one of the things that I kind of figured out pretty quickly again is that, you know what, the path to some sectional championships are going to go through Morris County. I think it wouldn't be shocking again to see 1 or 2 teams kind of out of the county win sectional titles again this year.
And Ryan, Patty, your take here as we've reached that midpoint of the season in the Super Football Conference, and a couple of big-time opponents might be seeing one another again this year.
That's right, Dan. It looks like another North 5 collision course between Passaic Tech and Union City. And Passaic Tech lost 22 seniors last year, including Trayshawn Dye, who was a phenomenal two-way player, and he's now at JMU playing linebacker. But this is a program that just has a culture of winning, and this isn't the team of last year, and I think head coach Matt Demers would tell you that. Congratulations on 100 wins, coach. But there's a common denominator here, and this is another solid high school football team, and they're just doing things a little differently. And I think the big difference is that they just have a little more speed. And Joel Perez, Ian McDuffie, Noah Foxworth, DePaul transfer Kadir Young. I've been impressed with quarterback Gabe Miles, his start to the season, and Jaden Santiago's got 3 returns for touchdowns on special teams, and there's so much potential with this team. And for Union City, they run that wing T at a high level, and Mark Boyd is kind of the guy there, senior wing back. He's now their school rushing leader. And what else makes this team special is that in a potential matchup with Passaic Tech, they have the DBs that can kind of match Passaic Tech's passing game now with Kingston Evans. He's going to Army, and Kareem Hector, he's going to Stony Brook. So those are 2 DBs there that make their impact on the game every week. And the special thing about this Union City team is that they have so many seniors. Like, all these kids are seniors, and in postseason games, especially postseason games where you've played against Passaic Tech, that's exactly what matters.
And be sure, everybody, to check out our midseason awards that are going to be available on NJ.com on Wednesday. So you could see with not only the notes that all of our beat writers just talked about, but also our midseason awards. Now we're heading to the home stretch here, and we take a look at this week's upcoming big games of the week. We'll start off, Mike and Luis, bringing you back in here to talk a little football here. A matchup of Big Central versus Super Football Conference, St. Thomas Aquinas taking on Paramus Catholic.
I'll tell you what, it's a very interesting test for St. Thomas. St. Thomas has had a couple straight outstanding seasons. However, if there's any doubt about what they've been able to do, you've seen it in the playoffs because their regular season schedule has never been all that strong. They've tried to go out and get a few games, but there's divisional play within the Big Central Conference previous years was not as strong as the competition, nearly as strong as the competition they were going to see in the playoffs. However, they're in a much tougher division now in the Big Central Conference, and they've gone out and played some very tough teams. Their opening game against Mount St. Joseph was an awakening for them because defensively they weren't that strong. They lost 36-26, but since then they've gotten better and better. And seeing the rise in competition that they're seeing now is going to help them in the playoffs. And here's where they're going to get an idea. Now, Paramus Catholic may not be the hierarchy of the Super Football Conference. However, they're among the hierarchy of the Super Football Conference. So they're going to get a real taste of that now. And I think St. Thomas right now, the way they're playing, especially defensively, the last 4 games since that loss, they've outscored opponents 176 to 48. Roman Blank's doing a great job of running the offense at quarterback. Now, we're going to be without Chase Young, who's one of their top running backs. He got injured in the Elizabeth game. But Chukwuma Odo has done a great job. This is a time for freshman Cassie Thomas maybe to step up and get some running time here. And Tariq Holman is not afraid to play freshman, as he proved in that first game when he subbed out Roman Blanks for freshman Zymir Weaver at quarterback. So defensively is going to be the key for St. Joe's against Paramus Catholic. Defensively on the line, Shannon Johnson and Wayne Wakefield have done a great job. The linebackers, Anwar Witherspoon and Jacques Dabney, also have been really strong the last 4 games, and their secondary is athletic and quick. So defensively is going to be the key for St. Joe's. And Roman Blanks, if he can hit his targets the way he has the last 3 games, it's going to be a tough game for Paramus Catholic.
Luis, Paramus Catholic now has this matchup against St. Thomas Aquinas after they've had to take on a couple of opponents, obviously in the Super Football Conference, most namely and most notably St. Joe's Regional recently. What does Coach Russo's Paladins have in store here in this matchup?
Yeah, and they played DePaul last week, so they've kind of played our number 2 and number 3 teams in back-to-back weeks, and it'll be interesting to see kind of how they respond after those 2 games. I know they were confident heading into the St. Joe's game before St. Joe's, and quarterback Lamar Best kind of did his thing, running for 5 touchdowns. And last week against DePaul, it was 26-21 at one point in the third quarter before DePaul and their explosive offense kind of took over and kind of were able to cruise to the win there late in the second half. I think the key for Paramus Catholic is kind of how do you respond to those 2 losses and responding to adversity, because in previous years they haven't been able to. They've kind of been down the last few years, but I know Coach Russo's kind of try to get his kids to buy in to him and the program, and they seem to kind of been on the upward trajectory over the last couple of years, and now here's a chance to kind of get back into the win column, and they're gonna have to kind of sort things out defensively. I think through 4 games they're allowing close to 44 points a game. I know Coach Russo is not too pleased with that, but they're gonna have to find a way to kind of slow down and contain St. Thomas Aquinas' run game and their passing attack. The key for Paramus Catholic is one of their big things is that they've been able to run the ball the entire year. Xavier Williams has had a tremendous start to the season so far. Had big games against Pope John early in the year, against St. Peter's Prep, and ran for, I think, 134 yards last week against DePaul. So they had success running the ball, of course, behind that big offensive line, which is led by Malachi Goodman, a Penn State commit. They're going to have to do that again. I mean, it kind of leaves the pressure. Kind of last week it was Marco Green who took snaps under center and kind of started that game with Recruit Cologne. And they got weapons on the outside. I know James Daly's finally back and healthy after he missed the first couple games dealing with an injury for Paramus Catholic. But Russo's going to lean on that run game, and if they can lean on the kind of the offensive line to kind of push around St. Thomas to kind of get into the second level of defense, Paramus Catholic is going to have a ton of success. I know they're looking forward to kind of getting back into the win column and getting back into the field on Friday night.
And Luis, you had mentioned and hinted at DePaul versus Don Bosco Prep. For the Spartans, they just keep on taking care of business, putting up big numbers on opponents this year. Now they'll have to travel to Ramsey to try to beat Bosco in what was one of their signature wins of a season ago.
Yeah, I think Ryan can touch on the DePaul side, but I think this is going to be, I mean, it doesn't get any easier for Don Bosco. I mean, you go up against Bergen Catholic's explosive offense, and then you're going to go on and play arguably the best skill that any team in the state has in DePaul. I mean, Derek Zamet's incredible, high 4-star recruit. I mean, Nolan James Jr. is off to a tremendous start, Boston College commit. And then you have on the outside, you have Elijah Burris going to Notre Dame. And then you have Desi Jones on the other side going to Ohio State. And of course, with their offensive line is also good. They got a couple guys like Mike Troutman and Marlon Bright. I mean, DePaul is loaded, so it doesn't get any easier for Don Bosco. So I'll be interested to see kind of what they kind of do game plan wise on that on defense to kind of slow down and contain a DePaul offense that honestly, like, they can score in a hurry or they can put drives together and kind of wear you down. It's going to be a tough test for Don Bosco on Friday night in Ramsey.
And Ryan, as we were just talking about, one thing that I mentioned on the broadcast of the Bergen Catholic Don Bosco game near the end of the game was, well, Bosco had to deal with one Campanelli. Now they get the other Campanelli for this weekend. And Friday night, you have a high-flying, very confident DePaul Catholic team they're feeling like maybe they should be able to state their claim to the number one spot in our overall statewide rankings. This would go a long way on their resume if they could take care of business against the Ironmen.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not ready to say DePaul is better than Bergen, but you can argue that offense is more explosive than Bergen's because Derek Zammit can be a bit of a dual threat guy under center, and Boston College commit Nolan James is on a tear. It feels like he scores multiple touchdowns in every week, and like Luis mentioned, two power four receivers in Ohio State commit Des Jones and Notre Dame commit Elijah Burris. Troutman's going to Penn State. Marlon Bright, the other blue chip offensive lineman for the Spartans, can go pretty much anywhere he wants. And I love this team defensively as well. And I look at a kid like Anthony Natoli. He's one of my favorite players in the state because he's not a big kid. He's 5'9", but he racks up tackles. He's the hardest worker on that team. And I think he had 20 tackles the other day. And he's just the exemplification of high school football. I mean, that's exactly what you want out of a player. And Bosco's going to have its hands full. And I think it's kind of like last week for Bosco. We're going to assume that Devin Sisler can't go, but if they can establish the run a little bit better than they did against Bergen and turn some of those 2 and 3 yard carries from Brennan and DeLuca into 4 and 5 yard carries, I think it's going to be a good game. And like I said, they're going to have their hands full, but this has the chance to be a good game if Bosco does, like we said earlier in the podcast, take care of the ball. And I think they're going to, and it's going to be a fun one.
And a couple of our great games of the week, we'll finish up down south, and we'll bring back Kevin and Bill to talk about Camden versus Winslow, and then the Holy War, St. Augustine taking on Holy Spirit. We'll start with that look at Camden versus Wilson. What type of game do we have on the horizon here with Wilson already planting their flag right now as what we believe the number one public school in New Jersey?
Yeah, Dan, we spoke about it a little bit earlier. This Winslow team has been explosive. Camden is explosive as well. And, Winslow has passed its last two tests and pretty much with flying colors. This Camden team is not as explosive as a Millville and St. Augustine, but it is very good. They are in Group 2 this year. They're going to threaten for a Group 2 title. They are that good. The thing with this game is Winslow's won the last two times. Camden won 3 straight against them before that, but you got to go back to 2016, 17, and 19 for that to happen. So, it's going to be an entertaining game. Like we've mentioned already, the two teams know each other, coaches know each other, players know each other. There'll be a lot of trash talking, as much as the refs will allow that to happen. But, it's going to be an entertaining game. There's athletes on both sides of the field, and, we'll see what happens because, Winslow's got a flush last week down the drain and really zero in on this week's opponent, while Camden's coming off of a really nice win against RV and it's kind of built some momentum back up.
And Bill, St. Augustine and Holy Spirit. St. Augustine obviously is a non-public A team, and they want to gain as much wins and respect as possible. And Holy Spirit is a non-public B combatant. They know that they have an opportunity here to really have a resume builder for their potential playoff push later on in an expanded field. What do you see in that matchup between the Hermits taking on Holy Spirit and the Spartans?
Well, as you mentioned, this is the Holy War. This is a rivalry game, and but both teams are really going to want this one. Holy Spirit, came into the season with a lot of expectations. They brought a lot back from last year. When they were really kind of sophomore, junior heavy. And then, first game of the year, they lose 35-0 to Millville, and you wanted to see how they responded to that. Well, they've responded pretty good. They've come out with 4 straight wins. They had a very impressive win against Camden, holding them to 12 points and really, getting pressure, forcing turnovers. I think this is going to be a low-scoring game. Both teams are very good on defense. We've talked a lot about the St. Augustine defense, throughout this year. And, you got 2 of the best linebackers, I think, in the state in St. Augustine's Matt Bonchik and Holy Spirit's Nick Medina. So, if you're looking for good linebacker play, this is the place to go. So there'll be a rivalry game. There will be a lot of emotion. And, whoever comes out of this, it's definitely going to be a statement win.
Those are some of the games on the horizon, definitely, that we're going to be taking note of for this upcoming week. We'll be at a couple of big games as well this week for our continued broadcast coverage here on NJ.com. On Friday, we will travel for the first time ever to Caldwell as Cedar Grove is going to be taking on Caldwell in a game at 7 p.m. And you can watch that game on NJ.com/watch as an NJ.com subscriber. And then on Saturday, it's going to be our first trip back to Del Barden for the 2024 season. The runners-up in non-public A a season ago are going to be taking on the Lions of Pope John. And Pope John, they have been really thrust into a very difficult season and schedule to start off. They would love to be able to right the ship by taking down the Green Wave. So that game's going to be at 1 p.m. on Saturday here on NJ.com. So that will do it for another episode here of the Jersey Blitz. I'd like to thank all of our broadcast partners here with our NJ.com beat writers, Luis Torres, Ryan Patty, Mike Kinney, Kevin Minnick, Bill Evans, Joe Zadalis, and our engineer, Brian Dekine, for all of his assistance. I'm Dan Long, and we'll see you next week here on the Jersey Blitz, NJ.com's high school football podcast.